Hello and welcome. I hope you're keeping safe. My name is Victoria Ugweme. I am delighted to welcome you to our event to mark the UN Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. I work as a support worker supporting adults with learning disability. I am also an active member of Southampton Stand Up to Racism. Hello, team. I am a trustee of the United Voice of African Association here in Southampton. I am responsible for all the African descent children in the city as the project lead. Isn't this an exciting role? I think so. The International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination was agreed by the UN General Assembly in 1979 to mark the Sheffield Massacre, when South African police killed 69 people demonstrating peacefully against apartheid passed laws in 1960. Past laws were designed by the racist apartheid regime to segregate the population based on color classification. How awful. I am excited about what we have lined up to mark this important day. We have passionate speakers, music, and dance, reflecting Southampton cultural diversity. We have young people talking about their experiences of racism. Youth standing up to racism is a theme for this year's UN Day, and I am delighted at the participation of our young people in this event. Over the next 90 minutes, we hope to raise awareness, showcase the rich cultural diversity of our city, come together and inspire everyone as we stand up to fight and stamp out racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and fascism from our city. Our young people also face racial discrimination and racial bullying. And I think it's high time we hear their voices. For when we say the children are the leaders of tomorrow, it is our duty as a society to empower them with all they need to be better leaders when the time comes. You are not allowed. I am not allowed to do nothing. So I encourage you, wherever you see racism or wherever it raises head in any form or shape, call it out, stamp it out, and let's create a society, a city that is more tolerant, more understanding of our cultural differences, and embrace one another with a true community spirit and citizenship. We are going to hear from Jay Shah, who has campaigned against racism for over 50 years in Southampton. We were delighted with the news when Jay was awarded an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honour List last year for his campaigning on anti-racism work. Jay came to study at Southampton University, and lucky for us, he stayed on. His contribution to the anti-racism struggle continues to this day. I am sure you will find Jay's account of his struggles one that inspires us and enthuses us for the challenge of today.
Hello, friends. And thank you, Victoria. I was at the University of Southampton late 60s and early 70s and involved in many, many anti-racist campaigns. When I came to Britain, I was holding a British passport in 1968 and needed a student visa to come to Britain. That's how we ran the societies then. And sadly, we are still running the society now. I got involved fairly early on at the university in a campaign to admit people, mainly Black and Asian people, from East Africa with British passports to Britain without any condition. There was a quota system operating that, because of the numbers game being played by the then Home Secretary, we were all required to fit into quotas, and it took as much as 5 years for somebody who didn't have any jobs to come to this country. I was also involved in many other campaigns, including anti-apartheid campaign, which was against the racist apartheid regime, The long struggle was eventually successful with the release of Nelson Mandela and other incarcerated people in prisons for decades. We rejoiced the end of white minority laws, but it didn't come until early 90s. It was Margaret Thatcher, when she was Prime Minister, had famously said that changes in South Africa should be evolutionary, not revolutionary. Now, Gandhi has burnt his passbook in South Africa 100 years earlier. How long is the evolution going to wait? Um, so, we got a system which was British system which supporting that torture and murder of those who dared to resist the regime in South Africa. Here in the UK, there was a struggle which was simultaneously against the openly fascist National Front, which was terrorizing and carrying out racist attacks on Black and Asian people, deliberately targeting marches in the areas of high Asian and Black population. We formed the Anti-Nazi League nationally and organized locally with national demonstrators. This included also in Southampton. Eventually, we saw off National Front both as an electorate force and a paramilitary thugs that attack Black and Asian people, encourage others to do the same. Sadly, they haven't gone away. They have joined the majority parties and the institutions and are under the surface declaring the policies. Now, what happened to Dr. Wang in Southampton only in end of February, sadly, was what was happening to hundreds of people in 70s, 80s, and 90s, and still goes on. Collectively and through solidarity, we saw off National Front. There were also local struggles in Southampton. There was a Southampton Race Equality Council and others which supported. There were many support mechanisms in Southampton. And it supported people facing discrimination and racial harassment in the workplace, or refused a job because of their color or ethnic origin or religion. If this was not enough, some bars were operating a color bar, refusing to serve people because of their color in the pubs and bars. One such pub was Royal Oak on Lodge Road. We had a demo outside there, and in 1988, Coast to Coast ran a piece on it, and they said there were many white and Black people all standing up together against racism.
He is actually quoted as saying, "I have had trouble from people like you." And that to us is unacceptable. What this illustrates is people of Southampton, Black and white, will not in 1988 accept that type of attitude.
The landlord can't ban all Black people just because one or two have allegedly caused some trouble. You just can't ban all Black people, can he? You just can't have a blanket policy for Black people.
The landlord's got his prerogative to do what he wishes.
No, he can't break the law.
So the current reporting that we have moved forwards because there are a lot of white people is not true. White people have been against racism for a long time. Anyway, we took on the Royal Oak, we took on the landlord and the brewery, and through the collective actions in a campaign involving hundreds of people, we won that battle as well. Now you might ask, why is it important to remember that? That was then, this is now, you may ask. Well, let's look at it now. The pandemic, the rise of nationalism, the former US President Trump, and our own government in the last 10 years have created a climate for the far right and the racists to start rearing their ugly heads again. The past informs us of the dangers of being complacent, but we weren't whilst others stood by. We know that we can take on the racists and win, but we can only do that by being active and collectively supporting each other and taking action. Racists are not born. People are not born racist. They learn to be racist. They learn to be racist by the influences around them. Advertising, government, rhetoric, all the people in influence saying things which they pick on. If they can learn from childhood to adulthood and become racist, they can surely unlearn being racist. I think the struggle continues, and it is sadly a struggle. I think that the true anti-racist of the nature of society is not seen by how many black people are up front and employed or in institutions. It is how many black people they retain. The black people suffer in silence. They join in institution in all the hope of having a change and appearance of the institution, welcoming everybody, and then they discover that they are facing daily racism and suffer in silence. That suffer in silence results in them leaving the institutions, going away, and then what is the net result? That the long-standing members of the institutions are all white, very few minorities, very few black people. And I think that the true test of anti-racist institution will be one which welcomes everybody. Thank you.
Many young people in Southampton have experienced racism and racist bullying, often leaving a permanent scar. I am going to play a short sound clip from our two young people talking about their experiences. First, Mary Rose, and then Michael. And in the background, we have drawings and artwork from two other young people, Nico Raphaels and Abraman Sane.
My name is Mary and I'm 15 years old. Growing up in England meant that I was subjected to many incidents regarding my race, some before I had even managed to grasp the concept of race itself. I grew up surrounded by people who didn't look like me, in a predominantly white school, in a predominantly white neighbourhood, and in a predominantly white country. I remember other children in school would come up to me and ask why I looked the way I did, asking why my skin was quote-unquote dirty. Even then, as a child, I remember wishing I could somehow erase my blackness, somehow erase what made me so different from the people that I saw. And it wasn't even because I hated my skin colour, but because I hated the way others would make me feel about myself. I just didn't want to feel that type of alienation anymore. I remember another time, I was just leaving a park with my friends, but as we walked by, we were greeted with a group of people laughing and calling us the M-word, a word I didn't even know the meaning of at that time. But people after have used this same word to speak down to me as though I'm somehow inferior to them just because of the colour of my skin, using such a derogatory term that reinforces the oppression established through the idea of white supremacy, used to justify something as irrational as discrimination. They used it like it was nothing, and as opposed to them it was nothing. Looking back on it now, I can only feel an intense sadness that racism continues to act as such a prominent part in our world. As a child, I couldn't even play in a public place without being exposed to racist acts. It is clear that even though racism has since been abolished politically, socially, it is still painfully evident in society. I continue to face racism to this day, however surreptitious or blatant it may be. It has become a normalised occurrence. Even if it is not all outright, it can still be seen through frequent microaggressions. There's nothing wrong with the colour of my skin. I don't think the world should have to see past my colour for us to be equal, because being black is a huge part of my identity, and I'm so proud to be who I am. Equality will start when ignorance ends, when people actively choose to challenge these unconscious and conscious biases in order to strive towards a better future for people of colour. Equality is my prerogative. It is not a luxury, it is not controversial, and it shouldn't be treated as such.
Hi, my name is Michael Nwabisi and I'm 20 years old. This is a short story about my experience with racism. Cognizance on the subject began in secondary school. I remember receiving regularly a barrage of verbal abuse, such as the N-word and various ethnic stereotypes. It happened in the classroom, the playground, which made me feel angry and isolated. It reminds me of a famous song which says to discriminate only generates hate, and hatred leads to war, and war leads to death. Let us continue to uproot racism wherever it lies, for change and for the betterment of posterity.
Next, our guest is Professor Michael Ning, Chair of Southampton Chinese Association. Michael is a professor of Next Generation Communications at the University of Southampton. His research interests includes wireless communication, quantum communications, artificial intelligence, wow, and machine learning. Michael has made an incredible contribution to the Chinese and wider community over the last 18 years since living in Southampton. As well as being the chairperson of the Chinese Association of Southampton, he is also the deputy head teacher of Southampton Chinese School, and he teaches Tai Chi and Chinese Kung Fu in his spare time. Michael, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon. All humans are the same in the eyes of the virus. As a lecturer that teaches machine learning, I know that diversity is a key to finding the optimum solution for any optimization problem. A company that welcomes diversity will be more successful. The same principle applies to the society and the country in general. We all have something useful to contribute to the betterment of the society. Unfortunately, there is a man-made concept called racism that stops all this. Racism is the enemy to diversity. It is the stumbling block that curtails the society. It spreads fears to the old and to the young. It is the virus that stops the society from growing. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the Chinese, East and Southeast Asian communities have been suffering from two kinds of viruses. One comes from the mother nature called the coronavirus. The other virus is called racism, which was created by certain misguided groups of the human race. Hate crime reports to the police from the Chinese, East and Southeast Asian communities have increased by 300% before the March 2020 lockdown. Local Chinese residents suffer from verbal abuses. In fact, 4 of our university students were attacked by a group of teenagers on the 17th of March 2020. As the lockdown eases in 2021, another horrendous racist assault happened to our university lecturer, Dr. Peng Wang. While out jogging on Tuesday, 23rd of February, Dr. Peng Wang was set upon by a group of cowardly racists who punched and kicked him to the ground before running away. Scapegoating has been used throughout the COVID-19 crisis. We have to stand together. We want to send a powerful message to the cowardly racists that we are the anti-racist majority. We will stand up to racism. Thank you.
We're going to have a bit of culture. Culture is beautiful, and I hope you embrace it as you watch. Michael is going to be playing a traditional Chinese flute. But before we hear it, here is a little history and significance so that you, my audience, can fully enjoy and appreciate it. The Chinese traditional flute is made from bamboo and it dates back to the 5th century BCE. Some form of transverse flute is believed to have existed in China as early as the 9th century BCE. The Chinese flute differs from the Western flute in so many ways. For example, it has an estral hole covered in thin reed membrane, which produces a unique, bright, and resonant tune. It is one of the most popular instruments in traditional Chinese music. Listen and enjoy. Bravo, bravo. Thank you, Michael. I'm sure everyone can agree with me. It is beautiful. Thank you. Our next guest is a good friend of ours, Mr. Lou Taylor. Mr. Lou has lived in Southampton in the last 25 years. He is a former professional musician and entrepreneur. He is now the director of Black History Month South, CIC. This is a social enterprise dedicated to raising the awareness of Black history and celebrating the achievements of Black people, both nationally and internationally. Over to you, Mr. Lou. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, for such a warm and wonderful introduction. Why Black History Matters. Through lockdown, many of us have taken up activities which before the pandemic hadn't been in our lives to any degree. Now, my wife took up walking, and hence, so did I. On one of our strolls around Southampton, we came across a pub in Walston with some artwork painted on an outside wall. It was a painting of Winston Churchill, and above his head was a quote that said, "Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it." Now, this opened up much discussion on our walk because I believed that the quote was incorrect. To me, the phrase should be, "Those who fail to learn from the mistakes in history are condemned to repeat them." Now, the notion of racial discrimination didn't appear in our society until the late 1600s, over 400 years ago. Of course, people were oppressed and placed in bondage and slavery all over the world and have done for millennia. But somewhere between the late 1600s to the middle 1700s, things changed. The North Atlantic slave trade, as we all know, gained pace at that time, and many participants from Europe through to the UK saw an opportunity to make vast wealth using free labour from West Africans. But the big question then was how to get the population to support what was essentially state-sanctioned cruelty. As is common today, it starts with dehumanizing one race and elevating another. Now, this led to so many publications and pseudo-scientific claims that people of dark skin were not only subhuman and placed on the planet to serve, but that the white race was superior. Edward Long, an English administrator, slave owner and historian, wrote a book in 1774, ironically named Age of Enlightenment, which essentially threw a canopy of darkness over an entire race of people and opened up the door to the legitimacy of discrimination. Of course, he wasn't the only one, but this narrative suited the economy of the time. It took hold, gained a popularity which has endured and spread in so many ways across our planet. Racial discrimination isn't the sole reserve of black and white. It exists in multiple forms across the world, anywhere when one group of people feel more entitled than another. Now, every year I get asked, why is there a Black History Month? Why don't we have White History Month? Why is it necessary? It promotes division, it creates even more racism, and so on. Not only from, as you may think, the white demographic, but also from members of the black community. However, with a different agenda from each side. Most people from the black community expressing these views tend to feel that black history should be all year round, and they're already conversant with the achievements of black people. The other argument is generally placed by people who feel there is an inherent unfairness about Black History Month and don't wish to hear the positive side. Now, in those instances, I usually refer them to something I know they would be totally unaware of. I take an everyday item that is used in every country in the world that has a transport system, the traffic light. The traffic light was invented by Garrett Morgan in 1923. He was an African American whose father was a former slave. That is why Black History matters. It unites all of us in our collective history, from traffic lights to music, literature, technology, and even world conflicts. There is not a single point in the world's history that we people of colour have not made our presence known. But the erasure of these achievements is part of what racial prejudice has produced. So the big question is, how do we eliminate it? Well, first and foremost, it's through events like this that draw together those of us who are already looking for ways to improve the world we live in. We can draw strength from being in this space, but our real duty is to go out and educate and encourage others to see a different point of view, especially when it comes to structural racism. Explain that structural racism is not a slight on one or two individuals. It isn't personal. As the name states, it's structural. It's built into the fabric of institutions. We need to challenge injustice and place ourselves in areas of discomfort if needs be, and speak out with measured, irrefutable arguments against a system that is designed to silence. Now, I'd like to leave you with a short story which will form the basis of this year's Black History Month South theme. So I'd like you to imagine a young man from West Africa. Let's call him Kofi. Kofi lives in a beautiful place in his beautiful country, but he was taken on a one-way trip to the West. He was unaware it was going to be a one-way trip. He was unaware that he'd actually been sold several times before he'd even arrived in that foreign land. But the deal was done. He was now just property. He was made to work from sunup to sundown, 7 days a week. Hard labour, very little food, and because he's a slave, of course, no pay. He was moved from place to place. Now, like most slaves, initially, rebellion and escape was in his heart. He tried to run and was caught, and his punishment was swift and severe. After a few beatings and more starvation, his resolve weakened and resignation to his lot set in, and each day folded into another with no end in sight. Now, this tale is not from the 16th or 17th century, it's from last year. Those who fail to learn from the mistakes in history are condemned to repeat them. Modern day slavery is with us all in every city, in every corner of the UK. Black history matters. Thank you.
In our next segment, we're going to be hearing from Mr. Idris Ajia. He has composed and written a beautiful poem. Idris was born in Nigeria. He had lived his formative years as an academic nomad. He is presently a research associate at the Physics and Astronomy Department of Southampton University. The poem is his heartfelt tribute to George Floyd's brutal killing by the police. A killing that shook the world. "I Can't Breathe" became the word of resistance against police brutality and action for change.
Hello everyone, my name is Idris Ajia, and I wrote this poem in the hope that George Floyd's spirit may find closure. For his humanity I searched and called. I can't breathe, can't you see? Give me water or something to drink. My stomach hurts and my neck too. Your knee is crushing my windpipe, my vision fading and life slipping. To his humanity I made my final cry. I'm gonna die, let me breathe. My pulse stopped and body stilled, for there was no breathing left to do. As onto the stretcher my body rolled, my final sight was of a man on the floor. It looked like him, but with a kinder face, very dead with grief in its empty gaze. It was then I knew why, for me, tomorrow would never come. For he had killed his humanity long before he murdered me.
We are now going to look at the issues of religious intolerance and hatred. We spoke to Rita L. Ghazali from Unity in Vision. Unity in Vision is a voluntary-run organization, and Rita is its inspirational chair. How amazing. Well done, Rita. They are based in Dorset, with an outreach covering many parts in the South. Rita is a Muslim, and part of her voluntary works involve working with Muslim women on a whole range of projects, such as computer classes, language courses, which supports women in acquiring qualification in a range of subjects. She's also involved in running a community-based international cafe. I like the sound of that, cafe. Sadly, with COVID, this is on hold and will start its monthly get-together when it is safe and permitted to do so. Rita has been part of a settlement program in Dorset for refugees from Syria. This is another group that gets scapegoated and often victims of hate crime. We asked Rita about the work Unity in Vision gets involved in, and also about the impact of Islamophobia on Muslims.
Rita, good to see you on this UN Anti-Racism Day. Thank you very much for joining us. For those people listening in, if you can just sort of introduce yourself and just a little bit about the group that you work with.
Okay, hello Adnan. My name is Rita Ghazali, and I am from Bomas. Originally, I'm half Sudanese, half Russian. I've been in the UK for quite a number of years now. I'm a proud member of the migrant community, of the local migrant community. I'm a chairperson for a fantastic organization, fantastic team called Unity in Vision, which operate across Bournemouth Pool, Dorset, and nearby Hampshire, which was established since 2007.
There's been a, in recent years, there's been a lot of, targeting of Muslim communities as a result of, terrorist attack, and some of the media seem to kind of put a label to, to the majority of Muslim people that they may well all be potential terrorists, and people can be forgiven for believing that, if you're a Muslim person, that you feel, somewhat under siege the way, you're portrayed by, by the media, by the system, and often by politicians and other people, in position of power and authority. How do you feel about that?
In my heydays, I used to be the visual performing arts craft and design program leader. 2006, 2005, 2006, we led a fantastic project. I was able to do sort of 60 minutes room makeover to a community project, which is the Old Gothic, now it's called the Old Gothic School. And it was a fantastic project where we had strict Protestant, Catholics, Muslim women, debating and talking about religion. Come open day and the launch, the local press was geared up to put it on its front pages as a fantastic work between Muslims and non-Muslims. That was on the 7th of July, 2006, which coincided with the bombing in London. The story was overshadowed, and that was, for me personally, the first lesson. Nobody wants to hear good stories. Everybody wants to hear the worst stories. And media, totally we blame the media, because if a small group of people do atrocious things under the name of religion, cult, club, that doesn't give us the right to make the assumption on everybody else.
Some Muslim, many Muslim people that we talk to and I talk to, they say that often, people in position of power don't help either by continuously, trying to label all Muslim communities in the UK as one, and lump them together, and they think that they're not doing enough in terms of tackling radicalism and shifting the blame on Muslim people. What do you think about that?
I think there is a 57% increase in hate crime, in reporting hate crime. But I will highlight it's in reporting hate crime. It doesn't mean that hate crime didn't exist before. I came out one day from a synagogue. We had a beautiful meeting, and as I sat down on the bus, a gentleman followed me, and he started running behind the bus. My position was quite close to the window. He spat on the window of the bus. To me, I felt assaulted, really assaulted. And this happened at a time when I think that it was the Petersburg incidents happened, and everybody was from the outset, sorry, that takes me to a very emotional place. That takes me to a very emotional place.
Yeah, just very very final question, Rita. Being the UN Day for the Anti-Racism UN Day, is there one sort of final brief message that you want to put out there?
I think United Nations have got to be a little bit more proactive, because one of the things that we decided as a small community, as a message to take on board, is to eradicate bullying, because it all starts there. You want hate crime disappear, get your bully down there in school. You want your domestic violence, domestic abuse to eradicate, start down there. But not just by thinking, and not just, but by really taking actions. Actions with who? With your teachers, nurses, with your, and I'm not even talking about the employment place, I'm talking about baby steps, where you've got professionals held accountable. And it's very difficult to prove it, but also maybe Ofsted needs to come on board. I'm talking about England, because I'm not talking even globally. Why I relate to the United Nations? Because it needs to start somewhere by putting a seed and putting an example of, for it to grow out into a bigger seed. It's not just good to come and talk to us and say, oh, we planted so much trees, so much. The human being is your asset. Get some of them in the right corner, and you get your future leaders. Thank you.
Rita, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Adnan. Thank you so much, Adnan. Keep up doing your good work.
We are now going to see a clip composed and choreographed by one of our young people, Benito Raffels, talking about the impact of racism.
They say racism doesn't exist, but don't feel judged when walking in shops. They say racism doesn't exist, but don't feel like they'll never really fit in. Racism doesn't exist, but they don't feel like charity cases, like they can't speak up, because they're always over-exaggerating. They say racism doesn't exist, but don't wonder why they got that look, why they feel like the odd one out. They say racism doesn't exist, but don't worry about what other people think about their hair. They say racism doesn't exist, but don't feel like they'll never be accepted, that they have to fit into ideals and stereotypes that just weren't made for them. They say racism doesn't exist, but they don't overthink every action when in public, desperate to avoid harmful stereotypes. They say racism doesn't exist, but enough to look through comments on a video of someone who looks like them and see hateful words just because of their skin colour. They say racism doesn't exist, but don't get mean looks from bus drivers. from shopkeepers, from teachers. It's the little things too, no more so.
Our next guest is Dr. Matt Clement. He is a lifelong anti-racist activist living here in the city. Dr. Matt is a senior lecturer in criminology and describes himself as a Marxist sociologist. He has worked as a careers counselor, community worker, teacher, and mentored several young people involved in the criminal justice system. As well as lecturing at various universities in criminology and sociology, he joined the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Winchester University in summer 2013. Matt is the author of a number of books on the criminal justice system, and he'll be telling us how the system disproportionately affects young Black people, or Black people in general, dispelling the notion that we are all equal before the law.
Hi, my name is Matt Clement. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Winchester, and I'm very glad to say that our Department of Applied Social Sciences, Forensics and Politics in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences are sponsoring this UN Anti-Racist Day of 20th of March, because we think it's important for our staff and our students to show our commitment to anti-racism. And I want to say a bit today about why anti-racism is so important in criminology, in social sciences, in society generally. And of course, when we think about a concept like social justice, it's pretty obvious that anti-racism is at the heart of that notion. So why anti-racism? Why is it important to be anti-racist rather than just being non-racist yourself? Why do we place this idea of anti-racism at the heart of what we're about? Well, partly because anti-racism says challenge racism. It says anybody should not be happy with a state of affairs in which racist institutions and racist structures dominate our lives and dominate the lives of all sorts of different people on the planet. Our commitment to social justice, no justice, no peace, that's the famous slogan, isn't it, which was first developed in Los Angeles in the wake of the attack on Rodney King, an African-American man who was caught on camera being savagely beaten by Los Angeles police officers, all white police officers as it happens, in 1992. They weren't used to the idea at those days that people would get caught on camera. We were in the pre-mobile phone era, so they thought they could carry on their beating with impunity, with no chance of them getting punished. In fact, they were caught out, films were taken, a trial was had, and the warning was held for months and months that if there was not justice served on this case of Rodney King, if somebody wasn't found guilty, if a police officer didn't face some sort of punishment for their actions, then there would be a reprisal, there would be an uprising in response. And this slogan, no justice, no peace, emerged out of the Los Angeles riot that indeed exploded when an all-white jury acquitted all the police officers who were up for the beating of Rodney King, despite the evidence in front of their eyes, etc. So we've had a long history. That is nearly 30 years ago now, the LA riots. And of course, that was just one of the latest examples of racial injustice. But it demonstrates quite clearly why a commitment to social justice is so important and why people need to challenge the structures and the institutions that manufacture racism. If you think about the structures that perpetuate and manufacture and perpetuate racism, well, clearly, you know, all of the ways in which we've organized our society have tended to perpetuate them in many different ways. The slave trade is a fairly obvious example, one which we in Britain bear a particular responsibility for, because we played such a leading role in the creation of it during the creation of the British Empire in the 17th and 18th century in particular, before the British banned the slave trade in the early 19th century. Though even then it was several decades before the trade altogether stopped functioning in British territories, and of course other countries carried on with the slave trade. For example, in North America, which of course explains the racist legacy that still damages that country since. So when we're talking about the structures of racism, you know, slavery is just, the slave trade is just one example of them. The institutions of racism, the one that we often think of, the institution we most think of associated with racism these days, whether we're talking about in Britain or in America, and indeed many other countries, would be the police, because the police play that role of enforcing social control, of reinforcing the status quo in society. And as a result, they often act in an institutionally racist way. The system as a whole seems to benefit from the divide and rule that's involved in perpetuating institutional racism. And often the protests about issues like the slave trade and institutional racism can come together. And indeed, they have come together very dramatically in this country around the question of Black Lives Matter in 2020. Probably one of the most famous examples of the Black Lives Matter struggle in Britain that occurred in 2020 was the action by the protesters in Bristol in June in pulling down the statue of Edward Colston, the famous 18th century slave trader who had made so much money out of that bloody trade and out of the misery of black people in Bristol. And then for his pains, after his death, was mythologized as a hero and a statue erected to him by the city authorities in Bristol in grateful remembrance of how important all the money that they made out of slavery had been to the creation of that city. So when the protesters pulled down Colston's statue last June, then you saw the protests at police institutional racism and the protests at the institutions of the slave trade and the structure of the slave trade coming together, all in one inspiring protest. Indeed, one of the protesters actually ended up with their holding their elbow on the neck of the statue for 8 minutes and 47 seconds, the very amount of time in which the Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin choked to death George Floyd last May, sparking that second wave of the Black Lives Matter protests. So the Black Lives Matter protesters were indeed reenacting that symbolic humiliation in reverse, and if you like, making the victim into the hero in this situation and making the violent person the one that was now being held to account, where the image of Colston was being humiliated and challenged as a way of rejecting the slave trade. And I think it's appropriate to remember that, because we know at the moment, literally over the last couple of days, Derek Chauvin, the racist killer, police officer, is himself, the jury's being sworn in to begin the public trial in America for his part in the death, very significant part, I would argue, in the death of George Floyd. So all of these factors have come together to make this particular United Nations Anti-Racism Day a particularly salient one. Another reason, of course, why it's so salient is because we've just been 1 year in now into the pandemic, a pandemic which has institutionally impacted very heavily on people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds in terms of their exposure to frontline work and the risks involved and associated with it, precisely because of their unequal economic position which those groups are in vis-a-vis the white population. In other words, again, it's the inequalities, it's the structures, it's the institutional racism that is built into the system that is creating all of the inequalities that then have these very unequal outcomes that are so harmful, literally, to the life prospects of people who are innocent of all the taints that are now being visited upon them. So for all of these reasons, I'm delighted to be endorsing this UN Anti-Racism Day and hopefully stand solidly behind any actions that we will be taking, past, present and future, to protest against racism and to show our solidarity with those people who feel the brunt of it.
Next is Abraman Sane, age 16. He is a talented artist and composer, and he will be talking to us straight from his heart about why Black Lives Matter.
Still, we march when you realize everyone's eyes is burning into you. The faint wither of hope is all you got. We must not be beaten. Still, we march. The baggy clothes, the hood over his head, the fancy clothes, the dirty dreads. That's the stereotype we've come to be recognized by. They see us as a threat and take our lives, leaving a trail of broken Black sisters, mothers and wives. The frustration, the tears, the sorrow for our people is all let loose. Still, we march. No politician can ease our raw and honest words. We have waited too long not to be heard. Today is the day we break that system. Black Lives Matter, we yell, praying for the victims. Still, we march. Still, we march. They run centimeters while we go a mile. We thrive on hard work and adversity, yet they move the finish line. My colour is beautiful and it's mine. Black Lives Matter. Still, we march.
We are delighted to have Dr. Dalia Jamil, Chair of Art Asia, to give us a talk about diversity, or the lack of it, in the arts, and also what needs to be done to address this issue. Dalia has been Chair of Art Asia for so many years. She's a passionate advocate of Black, Asian, and minority ethnics in arts. In 2019, she was awarded the Honorary Degree of Arts by Solent University, recognizing her commitment to diversifying and promoting cultural experiences across Southampton. Dalia has been actively involved in access to education and learning for disadvantaged groups in Southampton over the last 30 years, particularly women of BAME communities. Her achievement includes setting up the first BAME women's group in Southampton, which is still going strong today. Well done, Dalia. After Dalia, we'll hear a song from a project that has been recently commissioned by Art Asia. But first, let's have Dalia.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on the United Nations Day for Eliminating Racial Discrimination. My name is Dalia Jamil and I'm Chair of Art Asia. Art Asia is a voluntary arts organisation based in Southampton for the last 40 years. We deliver, amongst other things, the annual Southampton Mela Festival, which showcases the rich and diverse cultures of Southampton and beyond. We've been speaking about anti-racism and how to be fair, just and inclusive society for as long as I can remember, and believe me, that's a long time. Most people abhor the idea of racism, and yet the Black Lives Matter in 2020 highlighted the fact that racism is still strong and deep-rooted in our society, and that was only last year. It was a reminder that we are still striving to reach that stage where we can with one voice say that I've had a fair and equal chance to fulfill my ambitions, to be who I am, to do what I want to do and achieve. And there has been no barriers for me to stop me from doing that. I don't think many of us can actually say that, but particularly from BAME communities, it is highly unlikely. The COVID-19 pandemic gave stark evidence to everyone, if there was any doubt, that racial inequality exists in health, education, employment, housing, and much, much more, and having a disproportionate impact on BAME communities. It demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that people were suffering racial injustices enshrined in institutional mechanisms, and unless these were addressed, no amount of plaster would and could stop this racial inequality oozing out. I've been asked today to speak about the inequalities within the arts and cultural sector. As a basic minimum, ask yourself, how many BAME faces do you see as actors, producers, directors, curators, writers, painters, musicians, dancers, and the list can go on. I was once asked in very simplistic terms, it may be inferred that Black people are not interested, engaged, or do not have the talent. To quote Darren Henley, CEO of Arts Council England, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. How true. And what are institutions like the Arts Council of England, DCMS, proactively doing about this? The answer to these questions are not straightforward as it relates to all sorts of structural inequalities, including funding, investment, commissioning, and more importantly, the cultural landscape of the UK. As someone who's been actively involved within this sector for the last 30 years, I've always found it to be very frustrating and exasperating. An event like the death of George Floyd happens and organizations react to it. Pledges are made, but pledges have no meaning unless there's a strong will to include people in all aspects of the arts as creators, actors, engagers, decision makers, and consumers. And therein lies the problem. Engagement with BAME communities must be at par and as equal partners, not as givers and takers. This signifies power and who controls this power. The art and cultural sector of the United Kingdom are facing a long overdue reckoning with colonial histories and legacies, racism and racist legacies. The issues are not new, and calls to unpack ties to colonialism is present. The sector needs to recognize that talking about creativity also needs to address languages, titles, plaques, and statues to confront the ignorance and prejudices of the past is only the tip of the iceberg. As recent as last month, 25 of the UK's biggest heritage bodies and charities were invited to a summit by Oliver Dowden, Culture Secretary, who basically told them to defend our culture and history from the noisy minority of activists constantly trying to do Britain down. It is being seen as an escalation of the government's war on woke against so-called cancel cultures amid concerns at senior levels in the government over what it sees as attempts to rewrite British history. This begs the question, and a thought for all of you, if one does not accept the past and its consequences for the present and future, then no amount of rhetoric can resolve racism and its impact and consequences in the arts, culture, and indeed any sector. Culture needs to be freely expressed, seen and heard, but not stifled by prejudices. Thank you.
Now, Naya Rasta, Sailing Towards a New Horizon, has been written and composed for Art Asia's Belonging Project. The song gives an inspiring message to sail towards a new horizon, in search of a new life, destination, and belonging. Enjoy. I am pleased and delighted to welcome Linda Fordham, a member of Bournemouth Jewish Community, Chair of Bournemouth and Poole Holocaust Memorial Day Committee, and Jewish co-chair of Lessen, Hashnim Wessex, which is a local group of Jewish and Muslim women building bridges between our two communities through friendship and social action. Welcome, Linda.
Anti-Semitism is sometimes called the world's oldest hatred. The Nazi Holocaust is history's most extreme example of this. Hostility against the Jews may date back nearly as far as Jewish history. In the ancient empires of Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, Jews, who originated from the ancient kingdom of Judea, were often criticised and persecuted for their efforts to remain a separate cultural group rather than take on the religious and social customs of their conquerors. With the rise of Christianity, anti-Semitism spread throughout much of Europe. Early Christians vilified Jews in a bid to gain more converts. They accused Jews of acts such as the blood libel, which is the kidnapping and murdering of Christian children to use their blood to make Passover bread. In many European cities, Jews were confined to certain neighbourhoods called ghettos and had to distinguish themselves with a yellow badge worn on their garment and a special hat called a Judenhut. They were expelled from several European countries during the 14th and 15th century and denied citizenship and civil liberties, including religious freedom throughout much of medieval Europe. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, Jews throughout the Russian Empire and other European countries faced violent anti-Jewish pogroms. In more recent times in the USA, in 2018, there was the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. In France, in 2012, in Toulouse, 3 children and a teacher were shot, and you all know what happened after the Charlie Hebdo event in Paris in 2015, where 4 Jewish hostages were murdered at a kosher supermarket. In 2019, a record high of 1,805 anti-Semitic incidents were reported in the UK. 2020 saw a slight decrease to 1,668, but it's worrying the trend isn't coming down more quickly. But it's clear that COVID-19 has led to a rise in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and the use of dangerous alternative media platforms. In July 2020, Wiley used social media for a 2-day anti-Semitic tirade, comparing Jews to the Ku Klux Klan, calling us snakes and cowards, saying that we control wealth, saying that we are at war with black people responsible for the slave trade, and suggested that we should hold some corn, an expression meaning to be shot. More recently, in a recent tweet, the Labour Party deputy leader said that the new Scottish Labour Party leader was the first ever minority party leader, thus proving the central thesis of Daniel Bedell's very new book, Jews Don't Count, by ignoring her own former leader, Ed Miliband. This was discussed on the BBC's Politic Live show, which invited Jewish journalist Benjamin Cohen, after which he tweeted, "I've just been on the BBC Politics Live show, where the BBC literally just asked 4 non-Jews if they agreed with me that Jews are an ethnic minority. Imagine if I was black and 4 white people asked to judge if I was a member of the ethnic authority, if I was a member of an ethnic minority, it would be offensive." All the while this was happening, there was a banner at the bottom of the television screen that read, "Should Jews count as an ethnic minority?" By the way, under equality law, Judaism is a protected ethnicity. And even more recently, the Top Marks educational website put out some terrible homework for their year 2s to do in religious education. So what can you do to lessen anti-Semitism? So I'm going to give you 5 ways. Educate yourself. The first thing to do in the face of any discrimination is to educate yourself about how it manifests, how you are complicit in it, and how it impacts on those who suffer it. There's a plethora of information online, in books and documentaries, and through fiction. Call out anti-Semitism, any racist behaviour, when you see it or hear it. Stand up and be counted. Don't let your criticism of Israel become anti-Semitic. One way to avoid this, as actor David Schneider wrote, is to be precise in your language. Avoid saying Zionist or Zionism when discussing contemporary Israel-Palestine. The terms are too loaded now, too broad, and their application is often used by hardcore anti-Semites to mean Jews. Don't enforce anti-Semitic stereotypes. I have not got a big nose. Jews do not hold the power. There is no one way to be Jewish. Jews are not all greedy bankers and lawyers. We are ultimately quite often scapegoat for all economic crisis. And lastly, amplify Jewish voices. Follow Jewish organisations and figures and publications online. Take their lead when sharing information about anti-Semitism. Though you shouldn't rely on Jewish voices solely to speak for you, it's important to amplify them above yourself when it comes to questions of identity and experience with anti-Semitism. And to finish, I'd just like to say, take time to get to know people regardless of their gender, race, sexuality, job, religion. And who knows, you might just learn something and make some very good friends along the way. Thank you.
We did an interview with a Gypsy, Romani and Traveller community-led organization called Kushtibok, which in the Romani language of the Gypsies means good luck. How beautiful is that? I've learned something new today. We asked Betty Smith-Billington, chair of Kushtibok, about the issues impacting our Gypsy Romani and Travellers community in the South. Betty has lived in Dorset all her life and grew up experiencing racism and discrimination as a Romani Gypsy. Two blows too many, I say. She's a passionate advocate for the rights of Gypsy, Romani, and Traveller communities. Let's hear the interview with Betty.
Good afternoon, Betty.
Good afternoon, Adnan.
It's very, very good of you to, join us on this, UN Anti-Racism Day, and we've worked together for a number of years, and you obviously you're the chair of a Gypsy Roma Traveller group in Dorset, but you also work right across the the South and including Hampshire. Do you want to tell us a bit about Kushtibok, the group, and what sort of things you do?
Yes, yeah. Just to say that I'm Betty Smith-Billington. I'm a Romani Gypsy, and I chair the group Kushtibok. I also chair DIACT and the Dorset Council Gypsy and Traveller Forum. Here at Kushtibok, we act as a voice for gypsies and travellers in Dorset and beyond. I joined, I would say, about 8 years ago, and I must say, I've always been an activist, and I attended lots of meetings nationally, and Kushtibok became more activism, you know. And
that's great, Betty. For people who are sort of not fully aware of some of the issues around discrimination and racism faced by Gypsy Roma Traveller communities, do you want to just highlight one or two kind of sort of issues so that we can actually get a better understanding?
Well, the worst thing we face is the media, unfortunately.
Right.
There's a lot of adverse publicity, especially in the last few years. But I mean, funerals, when there's a funeral in the area, the police go around to the pubs and advise them to close. We've had We've even had the police distributing leaflets telling people there's an encampment in the area, don't have anything to do with them. And we took them to task, and they admitted that they were wrong. Well, there's the leaflets, planning. I mean, you know, the thing is, it's with planning. As soon as anyone knows that there's a proposed gypsy site in the area, even private planning, you know, travellers are trying to get a home for themselves, a place to call home. As soon as the gypsies, travellers are mentioned, you know, then the locals come out in force, because a lot of it does stem from the media, I must admit. But we, you know, at Cushtibok, we have actually been in touch with the media. We've actually got them now to stop comments on any articles to do with gypsies and travellers in the area, which is really, really good. I know that we went to the Beefeater, me and my daughter, no problem, got a table. The next time we went, my son-in-law was with us, and you can see he's a Romany, you know. Oh no, they had no tables, and yet they were near enough open, you know. So and there's something else I saw on social media, that gypsies have to pay in some parts of the country. If they recognize you're a gypsy, they make you pay before you actually order your meal.
Yeah, I've heard that as well, Betty. What about when it comes to issues to do with education and employment? Do you think the situation has got better or worse in the last 5 years?
Well, it's improved in some ways and it's worsened in others. I mean, as I say again, social media seems to incite hatred.
Mm-hmm.
There was a vigilante group in Weston-super-Mare a couple of years ago. I mean, it was disgraceful because the police said it was a peaceful protest. But social media, you see, it incited people. And there was about 200 people, and they, you know, they terrified the travellers. There was children there. It was really bad. And with education, I mean, let's face it, when they've got no proper stopping places, the children, they're pushed from pillar to post. As soon as they pull into a place, you know, they have to go. And especially with this new, you know, this new response to the consultation that's just come out, I don't know what's going to happen to the children, because the thing is, they're talking about taking their homes away from them. You know, it's going to be really bad, and it's not fair on the children, you know. And another thing, you know, the history of gypsies and travellers, it should be in the school curriculum. And then the children that are there, the non-travellers, will understand more. The teachers will understand more, and they will realise the lifestyle, and they will accept children for a few weeks here and a few weeks there. And also traveller education, that is very sadly missed. You know, because the thing is, they used to go around and the children loved it. They loved it because the thing is, they were all together with their own. They didn't have to go into school and risk bullying. So, you know, that is a sad loss for the traveller education.
Yeah. So do you think, you know, the school curriculum needs to be changed to actually reflect
definitely
the history of you know, of our communities in the UK? How do you think we can do that, Betty?
Well, we just have to do what I'm doing. You know, we have to keep the group going, try and get some groups going, just lobby the local councillors. The thing is, if you lobby your local councillors, it feeds up. It always feeds up.
Yeah. Do you think you know, councillors and politicians are often receptive to the issues impacting on Gypsy Roma traveller communities?
I think they are now. Well, they are locally. I must admit, I've made some very good progress with BCP Council. I mean, I've always been in contact with Dorset, but with BCP Council, at one time, they never admitted to having any Romany people in Bournemouth whatsoever, but they are recognising it. And yes, I've made some good contacts, and, you know, they are addressing the unauthorised encampments. They're realising that they have to have some sites. They're looking, I mean, I'm not saying it will happen, but we are trying our best, and they are looking at more permanent and transit sites in the BCP area.
Yeah, that's great. But just one more question, Betty. Obviously, you know, today's the you know, the UN Day for anti-racism, and people are going to be marking it all around the world. Some people are still, you know, reluctant to call out racism when they see What's your message to them?
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. The thing is, Rosa Parks, what did she say? You must never be fearful of what you're doing when it is right. And I think that those were wonderful words. And when we know we're right, we should follow our heart and we should stand up to racism.
I totally agree. Betty, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure.
Hopefully we'll catch up very soon. Thank you.
Yes, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Now we're going to see some traditional Polish dancing performed by the Cllr party group. I hope I pronounced that right. The group was formed by the Polish community that have made Southampton their home. This group has added to the amazing cultural diversity that we have in our city today. This is a short clip from a video they made when they performed in Cowes, Isles of Wight before the pandemic outbreak. Let's hope we'll see them performing in the city soon.
All right, Adam.
Next up is Sofia Kerr. She is young, vibrant, passionate, and someone I truly admire. She is also the councillor for Shirley Ward since 2011. Satvir was born, raised, and has always lived in Southampton. She attended St. Anne's Catholic School, where she was elected the first non-Catholic held girl. I am so proud of St. Anne's Catholic School. They raise brilliant and amazing girls to reach and fulfill their highest potential. She is a double graduate from our two universities, which is the Solent University and Southampton University. It never does any harm to have a couple of degrees to your name, does it, Satvir? I don't think so. I know you do. Satvir is the city's council cabinet member for homes and culture and is leading on Southampton's bid to become a city of culture. How brilliant would it be for us to win and having this loads of diversity to showcase on that day? I can't wait. Satvir will talk about the council's policy on dealing with racism.
Hello everyone, I'm Sofia Kerr, a local councillor and cabinet member in Southampton. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today at this important event. I've attended so many anti-racism rallies in Southampton, and with each one I'm overwhelmed with how many people attend. It fills me with so much pride, seeing people from all ages, backgrounds, religion and races, standing together, shoulder to shoulder, united, as we are all today, virtually, showing collective solidarity against all forms of racism in our great, diverse city. Like so many of you, I was horrified to learn about the recent violent attack against Dr. Wang. My complete solidarity to him and the rest of the much valued Chinese community within Southampton. But it shouldn't take a horrendous incident for us to acknowledge that racism exists within our city. For me personally, I've faced racism my entire life, ironically more since being elected. Once out canvassing, talking to residents and asking them about what local issues they had, I had a man grab my hand, point at my skin and say, yes, that is my issue. I've been sworn at, spat at, had a hammer waved in my face, been told to go back home to my own country, when the only home, city and country I have only ever known is this one. Recently, I challenged a man in a supermarket who racially abused a mother, after she told me it was okay because she'd experienced worse. Her son was bullied after the 9/11 attacks. He was taken into the woods after school one day. His hands were tied behind his back and a bag was put over his head, while others took pictures and called him a terrorist. While this was never reported, it does not make it any less horrendous. And it should never be okay for something like this to happen to our children, or for parents to feel they can't send their kids out to play in the local park or even send them to school because it's unsafe. I feel the political climate has made things worse, where in recent years our politics has been driven by division and hate. We have had an American president who got away with basing an immigration policy on religion, got away with a million other things as well. A current UK Prime Minister who thinks it's okay to refer to black people as pickaninnies and Muslim women as letterboxes. However, the recent Black Lives Matter movement, and hopefully events like this one, give strength to calling out all forms of racism, including casual racism and unconscious bias. It is absolutely vital we stamp this out, because we cannot allow for this to continue to be normalised and accepted behaviour within our society. And it stops by us collectively saying it stops, with everyone accepting they have a responsibility to tackle this and say not in our city and not in our name. Locally as a council, we work closely with partners and communities. We set up and are currently strengthening our local hate crime reporting networks. So it's easier and more comfortable for victims to come forward, report it and get support. We are increasing our reach within our universities, schools and retail, as well as speaking to local young people to ask them what needs to happen for them. However, this isn't just a council responsibility, it's everybody's. And I'm pleased local organisations, community groups, charities and so many more are coming together to play their part. A special thank you to Southampton Stand Up to Racism, who always give strength to our collective efforts and remind us there is nothing Southampton can't do when we come together. There is real strength in Southampton's diversity. We have had people come here from all around the world and make this their home for centuries. It has made Southampton the place it is today. Vibrant, multi-skilled, resourceful, creative, ambitious, and so much more. We are great because of our diversity rather than in spite of it. I believe for lasting change against racism, we need to remember that no one is born racist but taught to be. And we can break this down through better understanding, real inclusion, and instilling love rather than hate. It's why, as part of Southampton's UK City of Culture bid, we are ensuring city organisations and businesses have inclusion pledges, so that at all levels, through their workforce to their boardrooms and even our elected council chamber, reflects our city's diversity. Our diversity is valued and given opportunities. It's also why it's important we continue and build on celebrating our amazing diversity through our city events. From Vaisakhi, Chinese New Year, Black History Month, the Mela and Hands of Love, that bring people together from all ages, backgrounds, religion, colours, to show that more unites us than divides us. Let's all pledge to always do our bit, however small, to call out racism when we see it, and to celebrate and champion our city's incredible diversity by fostering understanding, inclusion and love. Thank you.
Welcome back. I hope you can now see the reason, and I also hope you are encouraged to do something to help support stamping out racism from our city and our society as a whole. I am delighted to welcome our next speaker, Steve Squibs. Steve has been active in a number of anti-racist campaigns in the city for over 20 years. He was involved in the activity against BNP in Southampton. He also helped to mobilize against the fascists who tried to march through the city in the wake of the EU referendum. And in recent years, he has worked with all the local groups to organize collection of aid for refugees in Cllr. Steve will talk about the challenges that lies ahead and the importance of organizing, most importantly, the mass involvement that we need to defeat racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and fascism. Steve, welcome.
I want to start by saying a big thank you to all the individuals and organisations that have contributed to this online event to mark UN Anti-Racism Day. I hope that everyone watching has found inspiration in the words of our speakers and in the performances we've watched. Even though it's difficult for us to come together in person, we can still join collectively to celebrate the many diverse cultures that contribute to life in our city and reaffirm our commitment to fighting racism and discrimination in all its forms. You know, I think the last year has been a turning point for the global struggle against racism. Our movement has advanced further in the last 12 months than it has in a generation, and at the heart of that has been the explosion of Black Lives Matter. First in the United States in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, and then internationally as people took to the streets in their thousands to express both their solidarity and their rage at police brutality and institutional racism. In the US, the protests were even bigger than those held during the era of the civil rights movement. In this country, mass demonstrations were held in almost every town and city, including a fantastic protest in the centre of Southampton that was led by a new generation of young anti-racist activists. And I think it's cause for hope that so many young people in our communities are angry at racial injustice and they want to stand up and fight back. But we've also, in the last 12 months, watched the unfolding horrors of COVID-19. COVID-19, like the killing of George Floyd, has shone a spotlight on the systemic nature of racism in our society. Not only have Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities been disproportionately impacted by the virus, but the response of those in power has been characterised by racism. Look at the way the police use stop and search powers during lockdown. Look at the way that parts of the media have scapegoated Asian and Southeast Asian communities. Look at the way the government has attempted to divert attention from its own failings by scapegoating refugees and asylum seekers. And what we are witnessing in our leaders' response was actually part of a much wider process that's been taking place in recent years. And that's the way that establishment parties across the world have adopted a type of racist populism, and how that's then given confidence to far-right movements with overtly racist and fascist politics. Trump was, of course, the perfect example of that process, and we saw very clearly the way that could play out with the storming of the Capitol building in Washington at the start of the year. And even though Trump's defeat in the presidential election was rightly celebrated by anti-racists the world over, we shouldn't think that the far-right threat in the US or anywhere else is now going to simply just disappear. If anything, we're heading into a situation post-COVID that could provide even more fertile territory for right-wing and racist ideas. If ordinary people are forced to pay for the economic crisis created by the pandemic, if living standards continue to fall for large sections of our population, then the politics of scapegoating and the politics of despair can gain a foothold. Last month, we saw a very clear example of what that can mean, with a horrible racist attack on a member of our own community. Dr. Wang's from China, is a lecturer at the University of Southampton, and he was the victim of a really cowardly, unprovoked attack by 4 men who hurled racist abuse at him from their car before they got out to kick and punch him to the ground. And that's where the politics of scapegoating can ultimately lead. And while I'm horrified that an incident like that could take place in our city, I'm also filled with a sense of hope and optimism by the response of the many local organisations and individuals who came together to organise an online rally in solidarity with Dr. Wang. That rally was attended by over 300 people, and many more also took part in an action the following day by wearing red and running or walking in solidarity with Dr. Wang. I'm proud that Southampton Stand Up to Racism, as soon as we heard about the attack on Dr. Wang, contacted the Chinese Association of Southampton to organise a joint response. And to me, that's what being an anti-racist is all about. It's not enough to be appalled or outraged by the injustice and the violence that we see all around us. We have to act. Now, that might mean organising a solidarity event. It might mean challenging racist comments in your school, in your workplace, in your family. It might mean campaigning against the way this government treats refugees or against police stop and search powers. But we must act, and we're strongest and most effective when we act together in unity. So please consider joining Stand Up to Racism. If you're part of a local organisation, let's work together. Come and get involved in shaping our campaigns and activity, and let's turn the tide on racism and bigotry.
We're going to have the Chinese community in Southampton entertain us. And recently they celebrated the New Year, which is the Year of the Ox. And they have sent us a clip featuring the lion dance. The Chinese lion dance is a form of traditional dance in the Chinese culture. It originated in China sometime before the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907. The Chinese lion dance is operated by 2 dancers, one of whom manipulates the head while the other forms the rear end of the lion. It is normally performed during the Chinese New Year and other Chinese traditional festivals. It may also be performed at important occasions such as a business opening event, special celebrations, wedding ceremonies, or for the honoring special guest by the Chinese community. We are thankful for the Chinese community for getting involved with this event, and I hope you enjoy it. Wow, isn't it beautiful? Look at the colors. I'm going to say thank you to the Chinese community. You've been so amazing. But you know what? It's not just going to end here. Before I go, I would like to say a special thank you to all the contributors, to all the guests, and all our youths for their contribution. Because, together, we can support the fight to stamp out racism from our city. Well, I'm not going to have the last word. No, no, no. Our young people, they are the theme of this year's UN Day. And we're going to have two special young people, Maria and Evie. Maria is a member of World Stages Now, a community theatre group based in Southampton. And Maria will be followed by 11-year-old Ibi El Khalifa, a pupil at St. Peter's Primary School.
Race. Be aware of ignorance. It's abundant and expressed with empty words. Judgment is circling, a pack of attitudes at every turn, full of confusion, misbelief, and multiplying burns. These cruel words claw through vines and thorns, unfurl and bind, manifesting darkness, agendas misaligned. But there's a light in this fight, flags blown by a fierce changing breeze. Now's not the time to let things ease. The opportunity for change we must seize, but be wary when flags whip against themselves and shred. So don't abandon ship, onwards instead. We can no longer cower from the blinding truth, embrace the energy from the fountain of youth. Care for crew who are feeling lonely and trapped. There's injustice in our world, accept it, it's fact. Navigate the ship through this gale. We can't stop now, we cannot fail. The sun is rising, waters are swirling, the tides are turning. Together we can stand and unify as one. Comrades, we can do this. Let's get this done.
Stand against racism. The colour of your skin should not be used as a weapon, and it is not a weapon. If you see any racist activity going on, remember, silence is violence.